Namaste. I have a very unusual and interesting guest today, Siddhartha, who is a freshman, just joined Stanford University, came from Chennai, India. Siddhartha, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rajiv uncle. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Siddhartha has a very interesting background. He's homeschooled in Chennai in a very traditional Sanskrit language, speaking at home, raised in the tradition, and I'll let him say a few things about that. And he's here to study computational linguistics and its relationship with Sanskrit. That is his passion. But the reason I called him today to this show is I heard that he, in order to practice his tradition, both in terms of the way he lives, lifestyle required, the different rituals, the different agamas, the different practices he does at home. To live that, he had to get special accommodation or special consideration for housing. And the second situation is diet. The kind of diet he has, he wants a special consideration for that. So rather than compromising, running away, feeling embarrassed, which is the trend for most of our students when they are alone without any parents there, and kind of dissolve, digest, and compromise. He has asserted himself and done it very successfully. So I thought this is a very interesting story. Siddhartha, tell us first a little bit about your background and interest in Sanskrit and how that relates to your coursework in computational linguistics.
Okay, so I started learning Sanskrit a very long time ago. And it started as just something we did as a family for fun. We went to some camps run by Samskrita Bharati to learn spoken Sanskrit. And over the years, it's developed more and more sort of naturally. So with the natural progression of the subject. And actually last year, so I'm actually supposed to be a sophomore here at Stanford, but I decided to take a gap year to spend some time in Bilaspur, which is a city in Chhattisgarh, at a Gurukulam run by a very famous Sanskrit linguist whose name is Pushpa Dikshit Mataji. And she has a very unique pedagogy of studying Sanskrit Vyakaranam, grammar, through the Ashtadhyayi, which is the famous work by Panini. And so I spent a year there learning Sanskrit grammar and linguistics. And as someone who's interested in computer science and perhaps computational linguistics in the future, it was a really interesting experience. And as coming here to Stanford now, I'm sort of exploring the ways in which I can sort of integrate all my learning in Sanskrit grammar as well as and sort of merge that with my study of computer science, modern computer science. And I think there are lots of applications. And as I progress further and further through my undergraduate education, I hope to get a better idea of how I can sort of merge the two and really sort of bring out a lot of concepts that are sort of embedded within the architecture of Panini's Ashtadhyayi and what they mean in the context of modern computer science.
Excellent. So this is music to my ears because I've wanted this sort of thing all along, how to bring the Vedic tradition relevant to today's era, and nothing more Vedic than Sanskrit and nothing more current state of the art than computer science. So bringing these two together with a young man. How old are you, Siddhartha?
I just turned 19. So
19. So 19-year-old. Very competitive admission, Stanford. So here he is. Now tell us what are your requirements as in terms of living quarters, the lifestyle. What are your special requirements that you wanted Stanford to make available?
Sure. So for me, the way I live my life it's sort of twofold. So the spiritual aspect of my life, apart from, our vyavahara, our daily transactions, a large part of my life is spent in doing my rituals, my personal spiritual rituals. And those, so basically I can give you a rundown of what they include. They would include a ritual that's done 3 times a day. And that is basically a japa of the Gayatri mantra. So basically I would wake up at around 5 a.m. every day, have my bath, and then immediately sit down, put my dhoti on, and sit down and do and japa of Gayatri Mantra. And after that, I would do another ritual called the Brahma Yajna, which is remembering our rishis. And then after that, I'd usually do 12 Surya Namaskaras as a form of yoga. And then small other small things like reading the daily Panchangam, just to know what year it is, what tithi the day is, and where we are in the lunar cycle. Um, and so this is basically what my little ritual looks like. And I have to do this 3 times a day as per the shastras. Um, and so the issue with this in a college setting, in an undergraduate college setting, is that it's not very conducive to performing all these rituals, because the average undergraduate comes into college not really having much structure in their life. They sort of go party and the normal routine. Whereas for me, I wanted to make it a point to make sure I continue these rituals, which I've been doing for 10, 15 years at this point. And I don't want to lose that and just throw them out the window. Because like an athlete has certain things they do, whether it's yoga, whether it's just sitting quiet and meditating, as well as working out. All those things condition them both physically and mentally to be the best they can at what they do. And the same way, these rituals and these practices give me discipline, and they help me condition myself to be the best possible version of myself that I can be. And so it's really, I've always found it very critical that to me, that I make sure I have sort of the provisions to do these rituals. And so what I ended up doing was I approached the Office of Religious Life here on campus, and especially the dean of the Office of Religious Life, and reached out to them and just said, I have these practices and rituals that I do, and they're sort of non-negotiables. And so is there any way that you can make sort of housing accommodations that would be conducive? And so what do I mean by conducive? What would it require? So for instance, I can't have meat being eaten, cooked in the room. I can't have footwear being worn in the room. So these are things that an average dorm room would have.
Or drugs and alcohol, those kind of things you don't want, obviously.
Yeah, of course. And with American colleges, it's sort of an unspoken truth, but what ends up happening is, yes, dorm rooms often become centers for drug-related activity, alcohol-related activity.
Also, would it trouble your routine if there's loud music and all kinds of, the kind of halla-gulla college campus life would disturb you?
Absolutely. So those are all, there are so many different things that go on in a college dorm that are very different from the way I have lived and I have practiced my practices. And so therefore I found it necessary to reach out to the Office of Religious Life, and speak to the dean and say, can we accommodate my situation? And of course, in America, see, the thing is, a lot of us don't realize, as Indians especially, that America and especially universities have provisions, have ways in which we can reach out and make sure that we feel as comfortable as we can. Because that's the whole point of the American university, is to be as inclusive as possible. And they make an effort to do that. But we have to take the initiative to go out and reach out to these offices, and go to the right people and on the administration side and say, these are my needs. And so that's what I ended up doing. I went and I listed out my needs, and I said, these are the problems I have with a average dorm room, and is there any way I can rectify that? So obviously they were more than happy to help. And this is where I really credit Stanford's Office of Religion, because they did a phenomenal job of, in fact, I gave them my requests. I met the dean around 9 a.m. in the morning, and by 3 p.m. they had a room for me, all sorted out, all situated. And we'll get to the food part in a bit.
So normally an undergraduate would have a roommate, correct? But
Yes.
They made an exception in your case.
Yes, because I said that I have these requirements. I can't have loud music, alcohol, drugs, footwear, meat, and because these would disturb my religious routine, my spiritual routine. And so I said it's very important that I be able to maintain this throughout, to be as successful and feel as home as I can in college. Feel at home as I can possibly. And so they were more than happy to help. But it was only because I took the initiative to go and speak to these people and lay out my case. And they were after they had seen the requirements that I have, they were more than happy to help.
So here I want to ask my viewers, how many Indian places in the IITs, Delhi University, government places, or most places, how many such places would accommodate a student who goes and says, I have these special needs, I'm practicing Vedic tradition very seriously for the last dozen more years, I don't want to break that, and I want your help to give me the kind of rooming and housing which will be conducive to this. And in how many places would they say, okay, we'll give you a room to yourself where all of this will be respected? And even if the universities were willing, how many students would actually have the courage to go and go through this process? And I'm not talking about shouting, screaming, and making noise and denouncing people, but I'm talking about Siddharth's very systematic, very polite, dignified, very assertive approach, which I know a certain amount about what all he did. Going through in a very as per university procedures, following the process and being successful. Now, the other thing that people need to understand, people in India should try to understand, is this office of religious life. The office of religious life in a university, in American universities, has counselors or has people of various major faiths who are catering to the people of those faiths, and kind of their ambassadors, their coaches, trying to make sure they get a fair treatment. I don't know if how many Indian universities have an office of religious life with somebody in charge of Hinduism, for example, who would cater to the Hindu students. And how many would an IIT have a chaplain, somebody designated on the payroll, on the staff of the university at their cost, whose job is to cater to students of Hindu faith, Buddhist faith, Islamic faith, Christian faith, each different faith, where somebody can go and make such a request. I don't know if this is, maybe it is, but I'm not aware. At least when I went to Delhi University, there was no such thing. So the fact that American universities have this, and the fact that this system works because you made it work, is quite good, I think.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, another aspect. So my spiritual practices are sort of twofold. One is, of course, doing the actual rituals, the meditation, the japa. The second aspect of that is, of course, the food, and the diet. When a normal college freshman enters university, they're assigned a dorm room with a roommate, and then they get a meal plan, which is a card with a certain amount of meals on it for the quarter or the semester, that they can go to the main central dining hall in the dorm and swipe in and just take whatever they want. So for me, my practices don't just involve sitting down and actually doing the practice. There's also a lot of legwork in the background. So it's very important that I make sure what I'm eating and what goes into my body is conducive, again, to those practices, and making sure that, say, I have as sattvic a mindset as I possibly can. So my dietary restrictions are it's a decently long list. So my diet is basically what I would call a Jain diet, which is no onion, no garlic, no mushrooms, of course, no meat, eggs, and other animal products. Like, for instance, a lot of cheese has rennet in it. A lot of people don't realize this. And rennet is derived from animals. It's an animal product. And then another thing is gelatin is a huge additive in a lot of foods as well, candies and other things. And so all these are a concern. In fact, and so what I did was I went as part of my meeting with the Dean of Religious Life. I mentioned that I have some certain eating restrictions. I can't just go into the canteen and eat whatever I want, because they don't consider things like, in general, they don't consider things when they're serving the general student population. They don't consider whether the food has eggs, traces of egg, onion and garlic, of course, is widely used, and things like that. And then there are, of course, these very obscure animal derived additives like rennet and gelatin that are often just added on to things that we would normally consider vegetarian. So as a part of their provisions for me, the Office of Religious Life facilitated a special menu just designed for me that gave me all the things I required out of a meal plan. So they ordered a complete new set of utensils and pots and pans to be specially used to make the food that I would eat. And so they were willing to go to in incredible extents to make sure that I felt as comfortable as I possibly could. And so I gave them my list of dietary restrictions. I sat down with a point person from the residential and dining office, and she worked with me to build a weekly schedule, and designed each aspect of the meal. We looked at the sources of the raw ingredients to make sure they were produced at facilities and don't also produce non-vegetarian foods, so they won't contain traces of meats and eggs and all that. And then we tried finding cheeses that were rennet free, didn't have animal derived additives. And because in fact, a lot of Indians, even if they're vegetarian and they go in and they take the cheese that's offered in the cafeteria, that cheese, they themselves don't know whether it has rennet or not, because the manufacturer doesn't give them that information. Because you think about it, they're buying in bulk. They don't walk into Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or any other grocery store and pick up cheese and then give it to you in the cafeteria. It's an industrial scale kitchen. They're feeding thousands and thousands of students. So they buy everything in bulk. And these products are not labeled as in detail as many of our sort of A to B things are labeled. Because if you go to Whole Foods, I can read every single ingredient there. But often when you buy in bulk, they don't provide every single ingredient on the packaging. And so they can. So the person who I was discussing my dining plan with mentioned that we can't give you the cheese that we normally use because they don't mention whether it has rennet or not. And so to be educated enough to say, okay, can you check if your cheese has rennet? Can you check if this sauce has gelatin in it, or does it have onion and garlic in it? It's ultimately up to us as the students. If we want to have these special needs met, we need to make sure that we go and ask, does this have this? Does this have this? Because only then can the Office of Dining and Residences say that, okay, we can go check that and make sure that it fits with your needs.
One other thing I heard from about your case is that Jewish people who want kosher, the kosher requirement is that the utensils cannot have ever been used for non-kosher. If they've been used for non-kosher, then you cannot use the same utensils to make kosher. And you use that argument to say that, I don't want even the cooking to be done in the same utensils, because the whole space in which the cooking is done has to be sattvic. So that was also something they made available for you.
Of course, because they gave me the option, would you like us to make sure we wash it before we cook your food in, or do you want us to buy a complete new set? And I was like, if you can buy a complete new set, that would be a vessel, that would be perfect. Because ultimately, like the people who follow a kosher diet, it's important that the vessels and everything that is used to cook, that goes into the meal, not just the ingredients, are as sattvic as possible.
So this is an amazing, it's a very interesting story I want our viewers to understand. And I hope there'll be more Siddharths around in the United States, people who will assert that this is my need. Because, I found the Americans are exceedingly reasonable people. You have to tell your story. You have to make your case. If you are calm, relaxed, fair, and reasonable, most people will listen to you. And especially in universities, I think this is very much the case. You're not asserting or preaching that other people should be like you, right? You just want that your needs should be respected. And you have no problem with others doing whatever they're doing as long as they're not affecting you. So it's a tradition of mutual respect that you're practicing.
Exactly. And so like I mentioned, so they were absolutely willing to accommodate everything. So for instance, actually another thing I forgot to mention was I practice music. So I'm a Carnatic musician. I perform Carnatic music very regularly. And so to practice, again, a single dorm without a roommate would be a lot more helpful, right? Because I don't want to disturb anybody who's in my room. And so these are the sort of things that when you go to go through these avenues, lay out everything in front of them, and it's reasonable. I'm not saying go there and make a big scene and say, I need this. Explain to them these are my religious practices. And they're more than willing, absolutely more than willing to help you and accommodate you. And this is something we don't even see in India. Like you mentioned, if I went to JNU or IIT and walked into the president's office or the head of the university's office, and and said, I have all these requirements, they'll say, get lost. We can't accommodate you in any such way.
And you know, in India they would make fun of it. I mean, the Indian media would make fun of it. It would be considered that you're a weird guy. But I want people to know that while I have a lot of critical things to say about the United States, I have to tell you that if you present your case in a logical, reasonable way, a very, very large percentage of American people will sympathize with you and will be there to help you. And I say it having lived here 50 years. So I do know what I'm talking about. Thank you, Siddharth. Wonderful. Congratulations on becoming a student at Stanford University. Wish you all the best. And keep coming back to give me an update on how things are going.
Absolutely. I look forward to doing that.
Yes. Namaskar.
Namaste.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here and also hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified. To donate, please click this button.